Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. Today we're checking out why Britain is the center of the world.
Here it is. Here's the original one. I think there's this misnomer that my orange coat is dead, but no, it's just dying quickly. There's just a good amount of this going on. But I think this thing has a couple more years for sure.
What does that have to do with anything?
This is my desk. I sit here all day and I work and I look at this map whenever I'm daydreaming. I just look at this map.
Oh. Maps are intriguing.
I bought this map off eBay and it was in like an elementary school and now it's in my office. I notice something every time I look at it that kind of irks me. That something is this. This zero. This zero, which is not just one number, but it's actually a corresponding line that looks like this.
Right.
Let's back up here for a second. The Earth is divided into lines.
Yes, it is.
Sometimes they're curved like they are on my map. And whether or not they're curved or straight has to do with this concept of projection, which I'm not going to talk about here. I've talked about plenty using a knife and a globe back in an old box video that I made.
There's also a really good map mem video about that kind of thing. So check that out.
But just know that the Earth is divided up into lines, latitude and longitude lines, ones that go up and down, and ones that go from side to side. All of these lines in the grid have a number associated with them. So for the up and down lines, there's a 0 point, and then anywhere to the right of that or east of that starts to go up from 0 to 180 with a little E next to it for east of the 0 line. And then everything to the left or the west of it has the same thing, 0 to 180 with a W for west, okay? That center point is the 0 point from which all east and west things are measured. The same thing for these side-to-side lines. If you go up from here, you're gonna start to get higher and higher until you get to 180 degrees north, or if you go south, you will go 180 degrees south, which is the South Pole.
Got it.
Finding out where the 0 point should be for these horizontal lines is actually quite easy. The Earth has these two natural poles, which make for a natural top and bottom of the Earth. And halfway in between those two poles, you have this perfect center point, the equator, which is a very natural place to put this 0 point and to measure everything from. The up and down lines are totally arbitrary where you decide them. Like, who's to say that, like, it couldn't be right here in Russia and this could be 0 and everything could go west and east from here? Or Japan, for that matter. Well, in fact, a long time ago, that's how it used to be.
Oh, really?
These maps with these grids were really, really important for navigating the world, and so everyone had to choose a 0 point. And most would just make their capital or their home base the 0 point. If you lived in Japan, you would just make Japan the 0 point, and the rest of the coordinates would be measured against that 1 0 point, which was Japan.
I didn't know that.
And same if you lived in France or Washington, D.C. This was fine because...
What? Okay. I guess he's going to tell us when that happened. The Greenwich, it's called the Greenwich something, right? Greenwich. Yeah, I don't know why I stopped it. It's not really a good stopping point.
This was fine because back then countries kind of just fought wars and competed with each other. They weren't really collaborating or aligning or trading as much as they do today. And so everyone could just have their own maps centered around their place, and they did just fine. But then, around the 1800s, a few things started to happen that completely changed everything. First, countries and empires, instead of just competing and fighting with each other, started to actually say, like, we should align with each other and trade and be friends because that's better for everyone.
This is the 1800s?
Map making and
the 1800s. 1847. I'm reading ahead of the video. 1847 is when it
sea navigation was becoming like a big industry. It was no longer just the king ordering maps to be made for their like expeditions, but now it was like private businesses going out and doing things that private businesses do.
Right.
And so there was now like a demand for good seafaring maps. In short, map making was trending. Seems like a pretty good time to be alive. Okay, and there was one more thing that was happening around this time that was super important, which is this. Trains.
Railroads.
Trains everywhere. Trains will just like
for
popping
time
up everywhere. And trains were also trending. People were now able to travel like across the country, not just like on their horses, but on this whole system of trains where you could buy a ticket, get on a train, and end up somewhere hundreds of miles away. And you know what trains run on, besides coal, is time. Timetables, schedules. How do you know when your train's gonna arrive and when it's gonna leave and when it's gonna get there? Time. Some universal set time. The problem is...
And also to keep the trains from hitting each other, right? Sometimes there's just one track. How do you know there's not another train coming the other direction? You gotta check that schedule, right?
And when it's gonna get there, time. Some universal set time. The problem is, back in the 1800s, there was no universal set time. Check out this piece of paper. Today, all of these cities and towns would be just on Eastern Standard Time, one time zone. But back then, every town had their own time, depending on when it was noon for them. If they were a little bit east or a little bit west of here, that would be different than in Washington, D.C. Total nightmare for trains.
That makes sense. You know, I know we're talking about train schedules here, but really, that is a more accurate way to do it, because if you're being a stickler for details, when it's noon does always change because the sun's always moving. So whenever the sun's directly overhead or as much overhead as it's going to be, that is noon for that one particular spot. So sundials are more accurate, really. But I guess we all had to get on the same page if we wanted train schedules to work out, right? Is that what's happening? Am I understanding this correctly? I'm totally sober.
Total nightmare for trains. The lifeblood of trains is time. And this time mishmash just wasn't gonna work. Okay, so what does all of this have to do with this? Look at this guy.
Chester Arthur. He looks familiar.
Know who this person is. I didn't know who this person was. He was the U.S. president that no one remembers. Oh. This U.S. president in the late 1800s.
He's a president. I didn't know it. I didn't. Oh my God. Wow. That's why he looked familiar. He was the president of the country I live in. The son of a Baptist preacher who had immigrated from Northern Ireland. He's from Vermont, but grew up in New York. Oh, he was the vice president under Garfield. Okay. Oh, and then Garfield died. He presided over the rebirth of the U.S. Navy. Okay, so he was a Navy guy too. Or he wasn't in the Navy, but he was a Navy fan. Oh, he used to live in Greenwich, New York. Maybe that gave him some bias towards Greenwich being the 0 point. He's a lawyer from New York. Isn't that always... Those New York lawyers know how to finagle their way into the presidency, don't they? I feel like we've had a few of those. Roosevelt. Okay, so this whole deciding where 0 point was probably because he was trying to increase naval power. And he said, hey guys, we need to come to an agreement. Arthur urged Congress to increase funding for Native American education, which it did in 1884. Wow, that's something you never hear about. This guy actually wanted to help out the Native Americans, unless it was a scam. Maybe he tried to offer the Native Americans student loans, but I don't think so. How'd he die? What? He became ill and ordered nearly all of his papers, both personal and official, burned. What was he trying to cover up? The next morning, he suffered from a cerebral hemorrhage, and he died the following day. Wow, what was he hiding? We'll never know. Probably the existence of aliens. Chester A. Arthur. What was the A for? Aloysius? Something fun like that? Allen. 21st president, 1881. Okay, that's... All right. Okay. Yeah. It's an important time in our history, I think.
The U.S. president that no one remembers. This U.S. president in the late 1800s saw a problem with all of this. He realized that having a bunch of different maps with a bunch of different 0 points based on whoever was making it was a problem. And he realized that not having a universal time zone or some sort of universal way of making the same time for everyone was also a problem. So he invited 41 countries to come here to Washington, D.C., where I live, and to sit around and think and talk about where this 0 point should be. Where should the center of the world be so that we can measure time as well as navigation? All maps could be normalized to this one spot. So after a moment of a bunch of white dudes sitting around in a room in Washington, D.C., which is kind of what's happening today in Washington, D.C.
Okay, Johnny, I know that's hyperbole and you're making a point, but there are other demographics besides white men. I can't say a lot. There are some. So we've had a lot of progress since the 1880s. Don't discount it. It's important.
They came to a vote, and that vote almost unanimously said that the 0 line should be right here.
Why? Why right there?
This line, if you zoom in, goes right through London, England. It actually goes through a little outskirts town called Greenwich. Greenwich is the home of the Royal Observatory of the British Empire. This would be the place where the prime meridian, or the 0 point for the entire world, east and west, would start. Every country at the conference agreed that this should be the case, except for the Dominican Republic, at that time called Santo Domingo. They said no. They were the one country that didn't like this proposal. And France and Brazil actually abstained diplomatically, which was kind of them saying like, oh, we don't agree with this. France continued to make their maps with Paris as the center point, but eventually they got on board as well.
Understandable.
So that gets to the crux of my big question of why the 0 right there, which is a bunch of people voted on it. But why were they so down with Britain having the 0 point being the center of the world? Well, the answer is because it was 1884, and Britain was just really good at the ocean. The British Empire was by far the biggest, most powerful navy. They had the most experience with maps and ocean faring. And so it was kind of a natural choice to let Britain, the king of the ocean, have this center point.
That totally makes sense.
And from then on, maps started to be drafted with Greenwich, this Royal Observatory, as the center point for the east-west divide in the world.
Y'all, the British Navy was probably, wasn't it the greatest Navy ever until recent times, just because of technology, the United States and all the money we're putting into warships and everything? The British Navy shaped the world in such ways. This is just another way. The British Navy enabled Britain to have the largest empire that the world has ever seen, and it changed maps, and they get to call the 0 point. They're the center of the world now. Way to go, British Navy. Good work.
Over time, this exact point, exactly where it's drawn, has shifted a tiny bit because of better tools to measure things. And so it's actually not literally on the Royal Observatory anymore, but it's effectively in the same place that was drawn in this 1884 conference. But they also established that all time in the entire world would be measured against this same spot, Greenwich. Noon at Greenwich, at the Royal Observatory, would be the peg against which all other time was set. They called this Greenwich Mean Time. So you end up getting a map that looks like this.
Oh, right.
Zoom in and you see Greenwich is right here. That's GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, okay?
Y'all, these time codes have got to be come on. So it looks like all of China is in one time zone. China. You know that's not true. Oh, and it looks like there's Normandy, France, which is west of London, is in a time zone that's east of London. That's dumb. I don't like it. Look at Iceland. Iceland right up here. What is that? That's incorrect. I guess that's to make trade with Britain easier. But then look up here. There's a part of Greenland that is what? What is that? That's just ridiculous. Oh, look at Venezuela.
Zoom in and you see Greenwich is right here. That's GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, okay? You go west of here and you start to get GMT -1 or -2, -3. You can come all the way back to the east coast of the United States, and this time zone is Greenwich Mean Time -5 right now. Sometimes it's -4 if there's daylight savings and daylight savings.
Oh, right.
Whatever. But you get the idea. The more you go west, you go back from Greenwich Mean Time. If you go east, it's the opposite. You go forward to Greenwich Mean Time. So if it's noon at Greenwich, then this next time zone, it'll be 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m., etc. So these time zones have been marked up in these kind of strange shapes. Eventually, if you go 12 steps away from Greenwich, 12 time zones, you'll end up here at this mess. This mess is the International Dateline. This is where Greenwich Mean Time +12 or -12 ends up at this line, which is where a new day starts. So let me give you an example of what this would look like. Imagine it's 4 p.m. in Greenwich, England, right here at this Royal Observatory. It is 4 p.m. GMT on May 28th. If anyone wants to send me a birthday gift, May 28th. May 28th. It's May 28th at 4 p.m.
January 23rd.
GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. Sitting, chilling in the Royal Observatory, which I've never actually been to. I need to go to the Royal Observatory.
You should go.
I need to go to the Royal Observatory. I'm going to do that this year.
Do
next
it.
year, at some point. Okay,
I want to do it.
It's 4 p.m., May 28th.
Right.
Across the ocean here in Washington, D.C. at that time, you can see that we go from 4 p.m. -5, so 11 a.m.
Okay.
So it's 11 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. at that exact time on May 28th. Head across the United States to the west coast of the United States to Seattle or Portland, and right there it's 3 hours earlier than it is here. You're now at 8 a.m. So it's 8 a.m. here, it's still 4 p.m. in Greenwich. It's still 4 p.m. in London. Now you head into the Pacific Ocean, keep going west until you get to French Polynesia, at which time it's 5 in the morning. You're now GMT -11, it's 5 in the morning. And then you get right up to this messy line. If you were to be in the Baker Islands, which is like a US, like random uninhabited island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Baker Island. What's there? Nickname New Nantucket. That's hilarious. It's uninhabited, just north of the equator, in the Pacific Ocean, about 3,000 miles southwest of Honolulu. It's about halfway between Hawaii and Australia. So no one lives there? Oh, there's some camps there, established by the U.S. Army.
You would be at 4 a.m. So it's 4 p.m. over in Greenwich. It's 4 a.m. on this random island in the Pacific.
That makes sense.
Cross this messy looking line. It's still 4 a.m., but now it's the next day. It's May 29th at 4 a.m. Here in Fiji, at the same time, 4 p.m. at Greenwich, it's now 4 a.m. the next day, May 29th. So we went from being 12 hours behind Greenwich to being 12 hours in front of Greenwich just by going over this international date.
Weird. It's like
you
time
could do
travel.
this exact same thing going the other way. Start heading east and you see that it's 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. Head all the way over into Asia, and now you're getting closer to seeing how that 4 a.m. happens when you get over to Fiji. Now the caveat to all of this is, of course, is that some of these countries switch by an hour for like daylight savings type things and whatever, but ignore that. Imagine there wasn't daylight savings. Right now, in this moment where daylight savings is at least ended in the United States, this holds across the whole world. Someday I'll make a video about this whole messy debacle.
That is a mess.
But the point of all of this is to say that because of this conference in 1884 to reconcile train timetables and to make maps more uniform, we now have this navigation and time system that rules our whole world, and Britain is just sitting at the center of it, of course. The British Empire may have fallen and the world has moved on from Britain being the center of the world in a lot of ways, but it's still technically the center of the world in a lot of ways.
The surface
I'm going to put some links in the description
world,
for some of these cool tools that kind of help visualize time zones if you're interested in that sort of thing. But yeah, my question has been answered. I actually didn't know the answer to this question, and I went on a deep dive. And
good for you.
Now I know. So now I'll sit at my desk, and I will know the answer to why that's 0. And I think that was worth it. So
that was worth it. Well, interesting video. I feel like I learned that back in school, but I kind of didn't care at the time, so I didn't commit it to memory, but now I know, and I'll probably forget it in a week. But that's how it goes when you're me. Johnny Harris, a wonderful journalist, has given us this beautiful video. I do love observatories. Whenever I go to England, I would love to go to the Royal Observatory. I think it would be really cool. Fascinating video. Thank you all for recommending. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Later.